Good morning. She makes me sound scary, doesn't she? We'll see how this microphone works. I'm an old school teacher, so I like to move around. I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll see. My name's David. I've been doing this for 53 years, I guess. Started in 1970. I said, we're not going to do the church. We're going to do whatever the Bible says. I said, a long time ago, I decided I wanted to believe like Peter, James, and John believed. And guess what? They're all Jews. So, yes, that's right. And so was our Lord. But I want to start this morning with the most important document that was ever written. Does anybody recognize this? These are the Ten Commandments. They're written on 2 tablets. And I want to point out one thing that's very important. They're written on both sides. Now, the rabbis will tell you that means that they're written all the way through. Of course, that's not, I don't believe that. And the main reason I don't believe it is because in Paleo-Hebrew, there's a thing called an ayin. Does everybody know what an ayin is? And an ayin in Paleo-Hebrew is a circle. So, first thing that happened when the rabbis started saying, well, they're written all the way through is, well, if they're written all the way through like a laser would cut through on a circle, what would happen? Well, the center would fall out, right? So the rabbis will tell you, oh, there's magic. If they don't fall out. I'm kind of going, no, I don't think so. God wrote these. And it's important to say that they're written on both sides because in ancient times when you're using a chisel and you try to write on both sides, what happens? Well, you weaken it on one side, you turn it over, you start writing, and what happens? It breaks. So the first thing we do is when we say it's written on both sides, we're saying, oh, that comes from God. Well, and if it wasn't stone, if it was parchment, we have the same problem. You write it on one side, you turn it over, you try to write on the other side, the ink on the first side gets rubbed off. So anything that's written on both sides, I mean, today we don't think anything of it. But back then, written on both sides meant it comes from God. Let's talk about the title just for a second. Is it Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb? It's actually Mount Horeb. What does Sinai mean? Sinai, or Sinai, means bush, specifically a thorn bush. Some people say that's where the crown of thorns came from. It's a thorn bush. Sani, or Sinai, means my bush. So when Moses said this was Mount Sinai, he's saying this is the mountain of my bush. The burning bush? Okay. This is where he got the Ten Commandments. And I want to talk about, let's see if I can point this. You see this down here? This is where it starts, right there. And if you could read it, now this is written in modern script. I have yet to find a Paleo-Hebrew font that I can use on my computer. So I went ahead and wrote it in modern script. But you start down here at the bottom, it says, Anoki Yahweh Elohika. I am Lord thy God. It goes up this side, it goes across the top, and it goes back down the other side. We can't see it, it's on the side. And then it goes across, comes back up and back across right here, and back down here. It goes across, it goes up, down. The old way of writing is you put your finger at the beginning of the line of text, and you keep your finger, and you follow along with the text. At the end of the line, you don't pick it up and come back to the beginning of the next line. You keep going, and you turn. They call this as the bull turns, or as the bull plows. In Greek, that's bastrophodon. You turn and you come back up. So you're reading left to right, then right to left, then left to right, then right to left. It's called bastrophodon. This is how this is written. And all ancient documents are written this way. The idea that you would stop reading at the end of the line and come back to the next line, that's pretty modern. Now, I think in the time of Yeshua, that's what it was done. But as we have it today, that was unheard of back then. So this is actually written in 10 lines. You start in here, that's one line, 2, 3, 4, 5, There's 5 on that one and then 5 on this one. This structure, I didn't come up with this. This was come up with Dr. Ed Metzler, I think is his name. Came up with this one. This may not be exactly how it's done. That's fine, but it's something along these lines. No doubt it was written in Paleo-Hebrew, but it's written on both sides, and that turns out to be really, really important. Okay? Everybody with me? All right. Let's talk about this. Now, before I get too far, I want to talk about God's name. And this is the name above all names. This is the most important name in the whole world, the whole history of the world. Yeshua, and I don't really mind what you want to call him, Yeshua or Jesus. Either way is fine with me. I'll probably use Yeshua most of the week, just because that's actually probably what his mother called him. Now, was it Yeshua or Yeshi or Yehoshua? Could have been any of those. Could even have been Hosea or even Isaiah. All means salvation. But I'll probably use Yeshua. Yeshua in Revelation 1 claims that this is his name. He claims it twice. What is this name? Does anybody know? This is Yud He Vav He. We call this the Tetragrammaton. Four-letter name of God. It means,
whoever has the Ford Fusion, if you wouldn't mind backing up, letting me back in so I can get the ice, and then I'll pull back out and you can pull back in. But it's right here in the front. Thank you. Sorry, David.
no problem. The way they do names in Hebrew is they take a phrase, and they take the words of the phrase and they cram them all together into one word. Like Yeshua actually means Yahweh Hoshea. Jehovah saves. Okay? Yes?
Could we move it a little over because it's cut off on the right?
Is that better?
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, if you want to get these slides, if you go to one of those QR codes and go out to the schedule, it says PDF right beside my name, and that's where you get these slides. Okay? Or there's actually a book as well, and if you go all the way to the bottom of the schedule, and it says David Fisher's Teachings, you go down, click on that. At the bottom of the list, there's actually a book you can get. It's all PDF. It's all free. God's name is Heyahoveh Yihyeh. I am, I was, I am, I will be. Or he was, he is, he will be. It's 3 versions, of the name of the word to be, Heyah. So, Heyahoveh Yihyeh, it means he was, he is, he will be. Now I'm going to go ahead and try to use this Tetragrammaton everywhere in the scriptures that I show. I'm going to replace the words Lord. Everybody knows that in the King James, if you see the word Lord in capital letters, that means the name of God, right? And every once in a while it's God in all capital letters. That means that they took that Tetragrammaton and they converted it into Lord or sometimes God. And every time you see that, I'm going to try to replace it back with God's name. Yeah. Now I'm going to say Jehovah or Yahweh. If you want to say Yahweh or Yahweh or there's some other variations, that's fine. I'm not going to argue about how you pronounce it, as long as we all know that this is God's name. Okay? Let's talk about this book of 7 seals. Everybody knows that in the Revelation, God has in his right hand a book, and it's sealed with 7 seals. Well, what book is that? Well, it's interesting because it says it was written within and on the backside. What does that mean? That means, first of all, it came from God, and second of all, there's only one other book that's written within and on the backside, on both sides. And what book is that? That's the 10 Commandments. That's right. Now, some people try to say, what's a scroll? Well, in Hebrew, the word for book, or anything written, is sefer. It can be a scroll, it can be tablets, it can be anything at all that's written is called a sefer, a book. But in This case, there's only one book in the whole Bible that's written on both sides. And it's mentioned in Exodus, and it's mentioned in Revelation. Right here it says, "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside." That's the Ten Commandments. Here it is in Exodus. "And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tables of testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both sides, one side and on the other." It's the same book. Well, what are the seals? Well, what is a seal? Generally, a seal is some wax or something along those lines, and you pour it on, and you take some kind of like a ring or some kind of a marker, and you press it into the wax. And in Hebrew, that's called an oath, that mark that you put into it. There we go. The seal itself is called a kotam, and the signet that's pressed into the wax is called an oot. In the Greek, the seal is called a sphargus, and the mark that's put into it is called a kerygma. Anybody know where else we see the word kerygma? Mark of the beast. So when we get there, when we find out what the mark of God is, then we're going to find out what the mark of the beast is. These 7 seals are, God says that the seal of God is his Sabbaths. Now, how many Sabbaths are there? Well, there are actually 8 Sabbaths in the Bible. There's the weekly Sabbath, everybody knows those. But then there are 7, in the New Testament we call them high Sabbaths. In the Old Testament they're just called moeds. Moed means an appointed time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through Leviticus 23, and I'm going to actually point out where they all are so to make sure we're all on the same page. Because when we get to the Revelation, if you don't know what the 7 seals are, you're not going to understand what's going on. Okay. How does God get the 10 Commandments into his hand? Because in Revelation, he's got it in his hand. Remember, the Lamb takes the book of 7 seals out of his hand and starts opening the seals? How does God get it in his hand? I thought the 10 Commandments were in the Ark of the Covenant. Well, it turns out that there are 2 ways in the Torah to send something to God. You can either eat it up, like on a feast day, or you can burn it up, like in a sacrifice. So if you eat something up or burn something up to God, remember the Passover, they would go and they would kill the Passover and they would take it home and they would eat it up. And they had to eat the whole thing all in one night. Couldn't leave anything to the morning. And if they did leave anything to the morning, what did they do with it? They had to burn it. So you eat it up or you burn it up. So what happened when Moses came down from the mountain? Well, they had the first 2 tablets. Remember, the first 2 tablets were carved out by God. And God wrote on the tablets, and Moses brought them back down, and what did he find? They were worshiping a golden calf. Well, 40 days before that, but when Moses went up on the mountain, he had just performed a marriage ceremony between Israel and God. So Israel was now married to God. So what does it say to do in the Torah if a man is jealous about his wife and he thinks the wife is cheating on him? Numbers 5, he does what's called the jealousy law. Does anybody recognize what the jealousy law is? What he would do is he would bring the woman, his wife, to the temple or to the tabernacle, and he would have the priest do a ceremony. And what they would do is they would take some water, holy water, probably out of the laver, and he would take dust off the ground, and he would put it into the water, and then he would take a writing, usually ink on paper, or on parchment, and he would write a curse down, and it specifies what the curse is. And then would take some of the water and he would blot the curse out into the water. Everybody with me? So he took the this water that now had the dust and the ink in it, and the curse, and he would have the woman drink it. And what happened? If she was innocent, if she wasn't cheating on the man, nothing would happen to her. If she was guilty, then it says her thigh would swell. Not sure that we're talking about a thigh, but the thigh would swell, the stomach would swell, and she would die. What happened at the Mount of Horeb? Moses brought down the Ten Commandments. He broke them. He ground them up with the calf. He threw it in the water and made him drink it. So, I'm sorry, I skipped the burning part. He burned it up and he threw it in the water and made him drink it. So he's burning it up and he's making them eat it up. And what happened to the people? The people ended up being plagued. See right here? And Yahweh, that's the four-letter word. Yahweh plagued the people because they had made the calf that Aaron had made. God is invoking the jealousy law here. Is everybody with me? Okay, well, some people will say, well, no, he broke the Ten Commandments, but he didn't grind them up. Well, what does it actually say in the Hebrew? What does it mean when something is in italics? You see this word it right there? What does that mean? It's in italics. What does that mean? Does anybody know?
They made it up.
That means the translators made it up. They added it to the text. Now, the translators were savvy enough to understand that if you read something in the Bible, you're going to think it's true. So they wanted to be sure you knew that they added it. So when you're reading it, take it out. Now they did it because they made it a little easier for them to understand. Now these two verses, Exodus 32, 19, and 20, are all together. That means there's no space between them. There's no punctuation. There's no punctuation in Hebrew anyway. But a lot of times to separate thoughts, they would put blank space. There's no space between these. These two verses happen all together. So he took the calf and he took the tablets and he burnt them up and he ground them up and they all go in the water and they have to drink it. God is invoking the jealousy law. Okay? Any questions about that? I want to talk about the word feast. Feast is a kind of a charged word. And unfortunately, there's about 3 different words that are translated feast. 3 different Hebrew words that are all translated together to be feast in the English. One of the words is kog. And how many of you can read Hebrew? That says kog. You need to be sure and get a lot of phlegm in there. Kog. Kind of like Noah's son Ham. It's not Ham, it's Ham. A lot of phlegm in there. That's kog. And that means a pilgrimage feast. That's a feast that you actually are supposed to go to wherever God puts his name. Where is God's name today? It's not actually anywhere right now, is it? What did God say to Solomon when Solomon said, I pray that you will put your name here forever? And the Jews glom onto that. They just love that. What does God say in response to Solomon? Solomon said, God said to Solomon, I've heard your words, and I'll do what you say as long as you follow me. There's a huge if in there. So for over 1,000 years, God put his name in Jerusalem. Is it there today? How do we know it's not there today? Because there's no temple. Because God has his temple, or actually his tabernacle, wherever he puts his name. Now, in Zechariah, it says God will choose Jerusalem again. And maybe that's what he's doing right now. Maybe he's choosing Jerusalem again. We'll see. But right now, God's name is not really anywhere. So that's why we gather here instead of Jerusalem. Now, all of us, 5 years ago, I went to Jerusalem for Sukkot. And it was wonderful. I wish I could go back. I'd love to be there. I'm glad I'm here with you guys, though. That's what a kog is. All right? There are 2 kinds of feasts. There are the first fruits feast. That's in the spring. And there are the ingathering feasts. Those are in the fall. Deuteronomy, actually I think it's Deuteronomy 16:16. I don't have that up there anywhere. We're supposed to bring first fruits in the spring. There's actually two first fruits. I'll show them to you in just a moment. One is the Sunday after Passover, the morrow after the Sabbath. That's always a Sunday. And the other is at Shavuot. So there's two first fruits, and there's exactly 50 days between them. I'll show you exactly how that works. And then what would happen is they would bring it, and they would say this little speech. Let me read it to you. Assyrian ready to perish was my father. He went down into Egypt and sojourned there with a few, and became there a nation great and mighty and populous. And the Egyptians evil entreated us and afflicted us, and laid upon us hard bondage. And when we cried unto Yahweh, God of our fathers, Yahweh, heard our voice, and looked at our afflictions and our labor and our oppression, and Yahweh brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terribleness and with signs and with wonders. And he was brought us into this place and has given us this land, even a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which you, O Yahweh, have given me. Now, the reason I put this up here is because this is not something the priest said. This is something each of us was to say. We were supposed to memorize this speech and say it exactly this way to the priest. I want to talk about something a little bit controversial. There is a prohibition about saying God's name. Some people say we shouldn't say God's name because it's too holy. But that's not actually what the scriptures say, is it? As a matter of fact, the scriptures say that blotting out God blotting out anybody's name is a curse. When you blot out somebody's name, especially if you blot it out of the book of life, that's a curse. We are to say God's name. We are exactly, in this case, this is the only case I know of in the Bible where it actually specifically says that every person is to say God's name. And what is it, 4 or 5 times there? 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Right there in that speech. We are to say that name. I'm going to say Yahweh. You can pronounce that however you like. But we are to say that name. In Jeremiah 4, it talks about greeting each other in God's name and actually swearing by His name. We're each to say to each other, we're supposed to greet each other in God's name. We're supposed to say, Chai Yahweh, the Lord lives. Yahweh lives. That's how we're supposed to greet each other. I think it's very important that we all know God's name and we all say it to each other. Okay. We already talked about the word Chag. I want to talk about the word Moed. Moed means an appointed time. Now, that's different. There's another word in Hebrew that's very similar, Me'od. That means very much. Moed means an appointed time. These are the times that God says, come visit me, come see me. I want to be together with you. Okay? And there is also, for every Moed, there is a Mikra Kodesh. Kara means to call. Mikra means to gather. Kodesh means holy. So this is a holy gathering. Mikra Kodesh. And then there's also I wanted to point out another word, Ohel Moed. I'm not cursing. Ohel means tent. Okay? Ohel, and you've got to be careful about Ohel versus, my mind just went blank, the tabernacle. Ohel does not mean tabernacle. When you see in there the tabernacle of David, that's David Ohel. The tent of David, not the tabernacle of David. Okay? Every holy convocation is also a high Sabbath. Does everybody know what a high Sabbath is? If you're here, you probably do. A high Sabbath is a no-work day that's not necessarily on a Saturday. It can be on Saturday. Doesn't have to be. But it is a no-work day, and there are 7 of these throughout the year. Now, in the Old Testament, we call them moeds. In the New Testament, we could just call them high days. we in the Christian world have started saying high Sabbath, which is fine. It's not actually in the Bible, but that's a fine way to describe it. There are days, Sabbath days, that are not on a Saturday. For instance, and I'm going to get a little controversy because I know you won't exactly agree with me, but Yeshua was crucified on a Wednesday. Thursday was a high Sabbath. Everybody with me? Now, I know it was a Thursday because Mark 16:1 says that the women went, and the translators didn't know what to do with this. It says they went between the Sabbaths. The word there is diagonal, which means between. It's like the same word we use for a diagonal, like in a box or a triangle. Between the Sabbaths. What does it mean between the Sabbaths? The translators didn't understand that. Well, there was a Sabbath on a Thursday, and then there was the weekly Sabbath on a Saturday. And so they went on Friday. Of course, they didn't say Friday, did they? They said the sixth day. We put names to the days of the week. But they went on a Friday, and they bought the ointment and the spices that they were going to use to anoint Jesus' body. So they went between the Sabbaths, which means the Sabbaths were on a Thursday and a Saturday. And that's actually what you have to have Jesus in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, right? So if he was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, and he was put in the tomb on right at sundown, then he had to rise at sundown, not at sunup. He didn't rise in the morning. He rose at sundown. Because if it was in the morning, he would have been there 3 days and 4 nights, or 2 days and 3 nights. He was in there 3 days and 3 nights, which means he had to rise at the same time of day he was put in the tomb, which was right at sundown. So we have Saturday, Friday night, Friday, Thursday night, Thursday, Wednesday night. 3 days and 3 nights. He was crucified on a Wednesday. He went into the tomb. He was in there Thursday, Friday, Saturday. He rose Saturday night. And when they came in the morning, he was already gone. The stone wasn't rolled away yet, but he was already gone. We're going to talk about that a lot. Okay. Right here is the only place that calls it a high day, John 19:31. All right? Let's go through these. I want to be careful because when we get to Revelation, we're going to talk about the 7 seals. These are the 7 moeds. You have to know what they are, or you're not going to understand what's going on in Revelation. Okay, so it says right here in verse 2 that the moeds. See, I changed the word to moed. I took out feast and I put in moed, which is the correct word. The moed of Yahweh you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. So what we're looking for is the word holy convocation. And I made it easy. You don't have to read all this. I mean, you're welcome to get out your Bible and read Leviticus 23. That's the main place you find them. They're also in Deuteronomy 16. But what we're looking for is the word holy convocation. I made them red so everybody could see them. Okay, so just to make it easy, I numbered them. Now, I started the numbering at 0 for the regular Sabbath. That's not what we're talking about, but I went ahead and marked it as a 0. Right up here is a 0. That's the regular Sabbath on every Saturday. Okay? Then we go down here, we see the Moed of Yahweh, even the holy convocations. And then here's the first one. It says right there, and if you can read it, that says Pesach. Anybody know what Pesach is? Passover? Perfect. Okay? So on the first day of unleavened bread, we have a feast called Pesach. And then on the last day, we have, this is Mitzot. It means unleavened bread. Okay? Everybody with me? So there's number 1 and number 2. Any questions? I want to make sure everybody gets this before I go on. Okay, good. All right. We're just continuing on. I have verse 9 here. Then we get down here and we see that on the morrow after the Sabbath, she says, it's not there. So this is not a moed. This is not a Mikra Kodesh. This is the first fruits. It's the morrow after the Sabbath. Does everybody understand about the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees on counting counting Yomer? Okay. Not too many people are shaking or nodding, so I'm going to go ahead and explain it. Okay. During the time of Yeshua in the first century, there were two main ruling groups. There were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, there are actually two divisions of the Sadducees. There were the corrupt ones in the temple, and then there are the ones that were more pure out of Qumran. Okay? When Jesus says the Sadducees didn't believe in the afterlife, they didn't believe life after death, he's talking about the corrupt ones of the temple. Okay? The people out of Qumran absolutely did. All right? So, the Pharisees, which are the rabbis, which are not necessarily Levites, they could be, they weren't necessarily. Paul was a Pharisee, but he wasn't a Levite. He was from Benjamin, right? Okay? The Pharisees started counting immediately after Passover. As soon as the Sabbath is over, the first high Sabbath, they started counting 50 days. The Sadducees did it this way, just like the scripture says, and they did the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. Does everybody see that? That's exactly what it says. It's the morrow after the weekly Sabbath, and they count 7 Sabbaths. They don't count just 7 weeks, they count 7 Sabbaths. So we start, and this is kind of important because if you don't understand this, you won't understand Jubilees. All right? So they start the week after the Sabbath, and they count 7 Sabbaths, and then they get down here to Shavuot. And Shavuot is also the morrow after the Sabbath. Where does it say that? It says it's 7th Sabbath, 2 loaves. What does it say? It says the morrow after the Sabbath. The 7th Sabbath you shall number habitations. They shall be fine flour and plate. Okay, this is exactly 50 days. So it's Sunday to Sunday. And that's important because when you do Jubilees, you also have to count Sunday to Sunday. So do they stick an extra day in between Saturday and Sunday? No, they don't do that. Now some people, when they count Jubilees, try to do that. You don't do that. You count 7 Sabbaths, and then the morrow after the Sabbath, which is a Sunday, is the 50th day. But it's also the first day of the next week, right? Okay, that's important. Okay, and then we come down here on this first fridge right here, we have a holy convocation. There's that word again. Mikra Kodesh, holy convocation. So high Sabbath number 3 is the holy convocation. Everybody see that? Okay. So then we start on the fall feast. We have a holy convocation number 4. This is the blowing of the trumpet. That says Yom Teruah. Everybody know what Yom Teruah is? Teruah means to blow. Yom means day. So this is the day of blowing. Okay? I'm sorry?
Happy New Year.
Happy New well,
Mid-year.
Mid-year. It's the 7th month, first day. Yes, I know. The Jews, when they went to Babylon, they came back with this idea that the beginning of the year was in the fall. And so they tried to change this to Rosh Hashanah. And I'm not going to argue about that, but the only place Rosh Hashanah is in the scriptures is actually the first month, the first year. It's in the spring, right? It's not there for the fall. Okay. So this is Yom Teruah. It's the first day of the trumpets. Then we go down here for another holy convocation on the 10th day. It's called Yom Kippur. Actually, it's Yom Kippurim. That's just the plural. Kippur means to cover. Atonement. When we get to the tabernacle, I'm going to talk about the tabernacle on Saturday. The top of the cover is not called a mercy seat. In the Bible, it's called a kipporet. What does kipporet mean? It means coverings. It doesn't say seat. It doesn't say mercy. It says coverings. Okay? And then, so that's number 5. Number 6. Number 6 is, right there it says Sukkot. Everybody knows what Sukkot is? I hope so, because you're here. Okay? This is number 6. And then number 7, the holy convocation is, that says Shemini Atzeret. Shemini means 8th. Atzeret means together. The 8th day of gathering. The idea is, You've been with me 7 days. Thank you so much for coming. This is God speaking. Thank you so much for coming, but stay with me one more day. Tarry with me one more day. In John, it actually calls this the great day of the feast. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about where those 7 are or what they are? Everybody knows exactly what they are, right? Okay. And you can do this again in Deuteronomy 16 if you like. Instead of Mikra Kodesh, they use the cogs and the moeds, but that's okay. You can kind of get the same idea. I'm not going to go through it all because I can tell you I was getting bored with this. Okay, so here's a list. We have the weekly Sabbath. I called it number 0. We have the first day of unleavened bread, the last day of unleavened bread. We have the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. We have trumpets. That's number 4. Number 5 is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Then we have Sukkot, the first day, and then the last day. Anybody have any questions about those? Okay. Those are all called the Moeds. And when we get to Revelation, we're going to find out those are the seals. 7 seals on the book of 7 seals. Okay. Now let's talk about first fruits. First fruits is extremely important. I don't want to diminish its importance by saying it's not a Moed. It is very, very important to God. Why did God take Abel's sacrifice but not Cain's? Some people will try to say, well, it's about blood, it's about killing, it's about... Well, the Bible doesn't say anything about any of that stuff. What does God say? Genesis says, in the process of time. Now that actually means the end of days, is actually the words in Hebrew. Kesyon, or Kesyomin, which is the end of days. Cain brought from the fruit of the ground. Now there's nothing wrong with bringing the fruit of the ground. As a matter of fact, that's what we do on first fruits, right? And if you're poor, any sacrifice can be substituted with flour. You bring flour, you have salt in it, you bring a little honey. If you're poor and that's all you can afford, that's okay with God. Any sacrifice. Now in the temple, when they're doing the daily sacrifices, they have to do lambs. There's no choice there. But when you're bringing something to God, if you're poor and you can't afford it, you can replace it with flour. So there's nothing at all wrong with bringing the fruit of the ground. That's perfectly acceptable. And that's what Cain did. He brought the fruit of the ground. And Abel, on the other hand, says he brought the firstlings of his flock. What's the difference there? Cain brought at the end of the days, whenever he felt like it, and Abel brought what came first. So why did God accept Abel but not Cain? It's first fruits. It's bringing the first fruits. That's what was important. So that long ago, long before the Torah, 2,500 years before the Torah, they were already doing first fruits. Does everybody see that? Okay. I also want to point out, there are some, in Hebrew, when words sound similar, that probably means they're related. I want to do a few of them. Firstlings is Bakor. Firstborn is Bakar. First fruits is Bikor. And morning, first thing in the morning, is Bokor. Boker Tov. Boker Tov. Have a good morning. Okay. Now I need to talk about time. And the reason I'm going through all this before I hit Revelation is because there's some things you have to kind of get an idea about. And a lot of these things we're taught in church. I didn't grow up in church, so I don't really know. But we're taught in church some ideas that aren't really correct. So we've got to get right ideas. Got to get rid of these tares. Get rid of the lies of the devil. We've got to get rid of the tares before you can understand what's going on in Revelation. And that's why there's a lot of misunderstanding in Revelation. Because people don't understand because they're using church terminology. Of course, it doesn't work. Biblical time is we have a 7-day week. And that was established at creation. It wasn't established, it's not the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. This was established at creation. Now, you see the words Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturdays. Where are those in the Bible? They're not in the Bible, right? Because God doesn't name the days of the weeks. He calls them first day, second day, third day, fourth day, seventh day, right? Everybody's with me. This is easy. This is pretty much the same. Except that the Bible never uses names. I'm sorry, it says Sabbath. Okay, there you go. Each day is 12 hours long. How long is the night? 4 watches. 12 hours at night didn't come into the Romans. So it's 12 hours during the day and 4 watches at night. So if they say the 4th watch of the night, that means it's almost morning. And the day always starts at evening. Now we can argue about whether it's when the last time you see the sun, or when the light goes down, or when you can't see somebody. It starts in the evening, however you want to count that. Okay? Then we have months. And months are important because each month has 30 days. Now, the Hebrews aren't quite as picky as we are. If we say July has 31 days, then we have to have 31 days, right? In the Bible, they didn't do it that way. They start the day, they start the month on the first moon. Now, you can talk about when do you actually sight the first moon. I don't argue about it because in Numbers 10, it says, Numbers 10:10, actually 1 through 10, it says that's the job of the priests. Okay? So the priests are the ones that are supposed to sight the moon. The sons of Levi, or the sons of Aaron is what it says in Numbers 10:10. They decide and they blow a trumpet. So I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to try to figure it out. I let the priests do it. I wouldn't go out and sacrifice a red heifer, right? That's not my job. That's the priest's job. I don't sight the moon. That's the priest's job. So I just go with whatever they say. But if it's on the 29th day and we haven't had 30 days yet, what do? Well, you go ahead and start the next month anyway. It doesn't matter. What if they can't sight the moon because it's overcast? Well, they go ahead and do 30 days and then they start the next month. And if it's overcast the next month, then what do? They can get 2 or 3 months in and it's all overcast and they can't see the moon. They just keep counting 30 days. So what can happen? You can get 2 or 3 days off. You can end up with a month that's only 27 days or 28 days. And that happens occasionally. And that's okay. It's all self-correcting. Because when you sight the moon, when you finally do sight the moon, you start the month. Now this makes it interesting for Yom Teruah. What did they do for Yom Teruah? Because they didn't know when the first day of the month was, when they were going to sight the moon. So they get there and they say, oh, well, it's 29 days, but we had 30 days last month, so we're probably going to have 29 this month. They get there and the priest didn't blow the horn. So what do? Well, they just waited an extra day. So this is the day that nobody knows the day or the hour. When Yeshua's talking about the day or the hour, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about Yom Teruah. Because nobody knows when this is going to be. Right? But once you get it figured out, then you know, okay, we're going to count from when they blew the trumpets. And what if I go and I sight the moon and they still don't blow the trumpets? Do I go ahead and start my month? No. We go with the priests. Everybody stays together. We start counting and we count 10 days. We have Yom Kippur, and then we count to the 15th day and we start Sukkot. Why is this a problem for people who live a long way from Jerusalem? If you live a long way from Jerusalem, you wouldn't necessarily know 15 days in when the Passover was. How would you know? Do I do it on the 5th day or the 6th day, or because I have to start doing the preparations on the 14th day. And if you lived in Greece, you couldn't get a guy on horseback to say, oh, they found it on this day. So sometimes you might not know, if you live far away, when to do Passover. So how does God fix that problem? If you miss it, God lets you do it on the second month, the first time. So if you miss it, then you get another chance. Do you get another chance at Shavuot? No. You get another chance at Yom Kippur? No. Just Passover. And that's why he allows us another chance on Passover. Because people won't necessarily know. Did we start the year? How do we start the year? We do the barley harvest. So there's no way for people to know that we're a long way away what was going on in Jerusalem. And that's why he gives us a second chance. So every month is 30 days, but we might not use them all up. And that's okay in the Bible. It's not like our Roman calendar. But that means that a year in the Hebrew calendar is 360 days. Now in practice it might only be 354 days or 355 days. But the standard is 360 days, 12 months of 30 days. Now what happens if the barley harvest, I know you guys all know this, what happens if the barley harvest doesn't show up? We do the 12th month over again, right? After they came back from Babylon, they called the 12th month Adar. If we need to do it again because the barley harvest isn't ready yet, we call it Adar. Do Adar again. Okay? Everybody with me? Yeah. Okay, good. Now we have years, and years are 360 days each, but we also count years just like we count days. We count 7 years, okay? And then we have a Sabbath year, that's called a Shemitah. I know this is all old news for all you guys, but I need to make sure everybody knows. Okay? We count a Shemitah, and then we count, just like we counted first fruits, we count Sunday through Saturday, the first to the 7th year, and then I like to call them Sunday year, Monday year, Tuesday year, Wednesday year, Thursday year, Friday year, Saturday year, because everybody understands what I'm talking about. We count 7 Saturday years, and then we have what's called a Havel, Jubilee. The Jubilee is on a Sunday year. We don't stick an extra year in between. Some people try to do that. Don't stick an extra year in between that. So the Jubilee is always on a Sunday year, just like first fruits, just like Shavuot. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? That's going to end up being kind of important. Okay, so from the beginning of one Jubilee to the beginning of the next Jubilee, how many years is it? 49. 49 years. It is the 50th year, but it's also the first year of the next cycle. So Jubilee is always on a Sunday year. So from a Sunday year to a Sunday year has to be a multiple 7. So it's 49 years from the beginning of one Jubilee to the beginning of the next Jubilee. Okay, I just did that one. This is the hard one. There's this pattern all the way through the scriptures. There's 40, 40, 40. There were 40 years that Moses spent in Egypt. Then he spent 40 years in the desert with his father-in-law and got married and had kids. Then he went back to Egypt, picked up the children of Israel, brought them back to Sinai, and he spent another 40 years. So how old was Moses when he died? 120. 40, 40, 40. How many years did Saul rule over Israel? All Israel. 40 years. How many years did David rule over all of it? Over 70 years in Hebron and 33 years over all Israel. 40 years. How many years did Solomon rule? 40. 40, 40, 40. 120 years. Seeing the pattern? God says right before the flood, what does he say? He says, my spirit will not always strive with man, but his days shall be 120 years. Here we go, another 120. What is it talking about? When God says his spirit will not always strive, he's not talking about years, he's talking about Jubilee years. So what turns out to be is the history of man is 120 Jubilees. And when it says, and I'm going to say this, and I know some of you are going to disagree with me, when it says time, times, and half a time, it's not talking about years. A time is not a year. A time is 40 Jubilees. So it's 40 Jubilees from creation to Abraham. I call that the time of the patriarchs. It's 40 Jubilees from Abraham to the destruction of the temple. I didn't say till Christ. I said the destruction of the temple, 70 AD. That's 40 Jubilees. So each one of those times, 40 Jubilees, 40 times 49 is 1960. So it's 1960, what we would call 1960 Roman years or solar years. Then it's 1960 years in the time of the Gentiles. Jesus calls it the time of the Gentiles, from the destruction of the temple until the Lord's return. Whoa, did I just tell you when the Lord's going to return? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to use this number a lot in the next week, my date is 2030. Why 2030? Well, 40 Jubilees from 70. 40 Jubilees is 1960 years, plus 70. 1960 plus 70 is 2030. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I know that's wrong. And why is it wrong? Because I'm not allowed to know. Nobody knows. But since I don't know, I'm just going to pick that date and I'm going to go with it. It's really interesting because that's 7 years from now. That's 7 years from now. Now, it's not time times, and it's not just time and times, it's time times and a half. If a time is 40 Jubilees, how much is half a time? 20 Jubilees. So we would call that 20 times 49 is 980. 900, that's pretty close to 1,000, isn't it? So it's time times and a half. So after the Lord returns in, I'm going to say it, 2030. After the Lord returns in 2030, what happens? We have a millennium reign, 1,000 years. Okay? So 2030 is not the end of the world, is it? No. 2030 is beginning of the millennium. It's when the Lord returns, when the 144,000 are resurrected, when the devil is thrown into the pit. We're going to go through all of that. Okay? We have 1,000 years of the thousands. The 144,000 live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Now, that's 1,000 Jewish years, Hebrew Bible years, not Roman years. We're on the Roman calendar, right? You got to convert. All right? So 1980, I'm going to do public math here. What is it? 3110 would be the end of the world. Okay? Now, I'm going to say again, that's probably not right because I'm not allowed to know. But that's the date I'm going to go with. Okay? Does everybody understand how I got those dates? This is important because when we get to Revelation, if you don't understand this, you're not even going to understand what's going on. Any questions? Where in the Bible? Yeah.
In Daniel, it says Moed, Moeds, and half.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It does.
Not years.
That word is translated to time, but actually the word is moed, which means appointed time. Mm-hmm. That's correct. I'm going to go through all the places, or a lot of places in the Bible where it talks about time, times, and half time, or just the word time. Okay? First, we'll go through time, times, and half time. It's only in the Bible 3 times, right? It's twice in Daniel and once in Revelation. Correct? You're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. 3 times. Okay? And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and dividing time. I interpret that, and I'm not saying you guys have to agree with everything I say. We can have disagreements. I'll be happy to talk about it. I think dividing time, times, and dividing time, or time, times, and half time, means the whole history of man. Okay? Now, I have no problem with dual fulfillment of prophecy. Does everybody understand what I mean by that? If I think that things happen in cycles, I think that's what God's talking about when he says a wheel within a wheel. Sometimes things happen in big ways, and in small ways, in medium ways. God has patterns. And if you understand the patterns of the past, then you can understand the patterns of what's going to come. Okay? In this case, we're talking about the big pattern. What's the whole history of man? Okay? So what he's talking about is that God is going to be given into the hand. The devil's going to be around until the end of history, until the history of man is over, and that's at least another 1,000 years, right? Okay. Then the next one is Daniel 12. It says, I heard a man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, and he held up his right hand and his left hand into heaven, and swore on him that lives forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, when he shall have accomplished the scattering of the power of the holy people, and all these things shall be finished. Finished. The end of time, the end of humanity. Okay? And to the woman, and this is Revelation, to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times and half a time from the face of the serpent. That means that the woman, do you know who the woman is? The woman, no, it's not Israel. It's the true church, which could be Israel. Anytime you see a woman in any prophecy, it always means a religion. And I'll go along with denomination if you want to say that. But it's God's true church. Now, a woman doesn't necessarily have to be a good religion. It can be a bad religion. Look at Jezebel. Jezebel rides on the back of the beast. So a woman in prophecy, see, the cool thing about prophecy is that it uses symbols, and the symbols work everywhere. If you understand a symbol in Daniel, you go to Revelation, the symbol means the same thing. God doesn't change. Isn't that cool? We're going to go into that a lot. Okay? In this case, the 2 wings of a great eagle, I'm going to put a spoiler on the end. What do you think that means? I think it means she flies away to, who's the eagle? The United States. That's important. This is what's been happening for the past 4 or 5 centuries. This woman, which is God's true church, has been flying away to the Americas. Why? Because God needs to protect her from the great day of the Lord. Let's look at some other times. We can talk about these and whether or not you think that these times actually mean what they say. But behold, they cried out, saying, what have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? And you come hither to torment us before the time. This is the demons, right? They're talking to Jesus. The demons understand something. What in the world are they talking about? The demons know that they have a period that they can stay on earth until some particular time, some particular moed. Okay? They understand. They say, why are you here? You're not supposed to be here yet. It's not time. The time hasn't come for you to come and torment us. We're supposed to have free reign on earth until the time. See what he's talking about there? Okay? And that day and that hour knows no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son nor the Father, but the Father. Take heed and pray that you know not when the time is. See, Jesus is talking about a time again. What is he talking about a time? Jesus was 40 years before the end of his time. We have the time of the patriarchs. We have the time of the Jews. Jesus was right at the end of the time of the Jews. And then we have the time of the Gentiles. All right? So Jesus is talking about right before the end of the time. He comes a short season. Remember that term, short season? Before the end of the time. What year was Jesus crucified? When you go out to NASA and you look for new moons, NASA can give you new moons all the way back to the time of the first century. Okay? We know that Jesus was crucified on a new moon, right? Full moon, on the 14th day of the month. He was on a full moon. If you go to NASA and you look for 14th day, or the full moon on a Wednesday, what year do you come up with? And I'll tell you the answer. It's 30 AD. And it's interesting because he was crucified on Passover 30 AD. And 40 years later to the day, on Passover, what happened? Titus came and surrounded Jerusalem, and they started the siege. 40 years. There's got to be something to that, right? 40 years to the day. Now this is to the day on a Jewish calendar, not on a Roman calendar, right? There's 360 days in a Jewish calendar, there's 365 days in a Roman calendar. So we have to convert if you're going to start talking about days. But it's to the day, on the same day. I think that's incredible. And that defines what a little season is. Because you remember at the opening of the fifth seal, they're given white robes and they're said to wait a little season. And then at the end of the millennium, the devil is released from the bottomless pit for a little season. Those things always turn out to be important together. They're all together. If a time is 40 jubilees, a little time, a little season, is 40 years. That's what we're going to come up with. Okay? This is the most important document that's ever been written. When I was a father, I'm an empty nester now. When I had kids, when they were young, I made them memorize this. I made them memorize it to the word. Now, everybody can pretty much, I think, come up with most of the Ten Commandments. If you ask people, they actually have to struggle. They can come up with, well, the first commandment is no other gods. Second commandment is no images. But there are things in there that are more than that. You really should memorize the whole thing. One of the things, for instance, in the second commandment that turns out to be so important is, I, Jehovah your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers unto the children of the third and fourth generation when they hate me. That's an important statement, and that's not even listed in most of the Ten Commandments. But it's sitting here, this is carved on stone. What does that mean? The sins of the fathers passed to the children to the third and fourth generation. That's an important concept. Now, notice it says fathers, not mothers. And it specifically in the Hebrew says fathers. Now, children is Benoim, which can mean either sons or children. I think it means children. But it says the sins of the fathers are passed to the children. That means when I was born, I already had the sins of my father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather on me. You say, well, that's not fair. Aren't babies born pure and without sin? Oh, no, they're not, actually. Turns out. You have the sins of your fathers on you. And it doesn't say this just once. This is in the Torah 4 times. If it's in the Torah 4 times, 3 times God says it, 1 time Moses says it back to God. That seems like it's probably pretty important. Can anybody think of anybody who was born without any sins? Yeshua. Why didn't he have sins of his father passed to him? Because his father is Yahweh, Jehovah. That's right. See why it's important that Jesus was born virgin birth? By being born virgin birth, and we're going to talk a lot about that. By being born virgin birth, he was without sin. Now that doesn't mean he couldn't have sinned. It turns out he didn't. He could have sinned in his life. He could have had sins in his life. He didn't. But he didn't have to overcome that sins of the fathers thing, because his father had no sin. So we're going to dig into a bunch of stuff like this. This actually went very quickly because nobody asked any questions, and that's fine. I think Karen kind of told you not to.
Because we want to eat.
Because you want to eat. Well, we still have plenty of time. Yeah. I think this is the last slide. Yes, it is. But I'm going to leave that up there. Yeah. Every morning I'm going to teach at 10 o'clock, and it's going to be stuff like this. What we're going to do is go through, first of all, these concept ideas. What are the 7 seals? What is a jubilee? What is a time? Some people don't really understand that stuff, and it's important that you understand it before we try to tackle Revelation. Tomorrow we're going to talk about who is Yeshua. We're going to talk about exactly where he came from and exactly what the Bible says he is, who the Bible says he is. This has been a controversy for thousands of years now. We're going to see exactly what the scriptures say about it. You come with an open mind and we'll talk about it. Then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about the steps we take through this life in our Christian walk. Maybe we shouldn't say Christian, maybe I should say believer's walk. And I'm going to be very, very hard on the Catholic Church this week. If any of you are Catholic, I'm sorry. If you don't understand what the Catholics have done, you won't understand Revelation either. We have, when we walk through this life, 3 steps. I call them the body, the bride, and the son. We start with salvation, we go on to become a bride, and we go on to be born again as sons. Because that's the goal, right? To be born again. Well, when the Baptists say, I'm going to pick on the Baptists. When the Baptists say, oh, I'm born again. No, you're not. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. Being born again, he says, to as many as believed, to as many as received him, gave he power to become sons of God. It's a process. It doesn't happen all at once, and it certainly doesn't happen at baptism. You know, there's 3 baptisms, right? Baptism of water, baptism of Holy Ghost, and baptism of fire. Jesus says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you. The pattern of 3 is all the way through the Bible. We're going to talk about all of that on Wednesday. Thursday, I'm going to get into prophecy principles, how to read prophecy. And the way we're going to do it is, I'm going to take you back to prophecies that we know how they were fulfilled, specifically Daniel. Daniel's a really easy one because we know exactly how that happened. What is a beast? Is a beast a man? No. If you look in Daniel's prophecies, a beast is always, invariably, an empire. Every time. So when we get to the New Testament, is the beast going to be any different? No, it's not. God doesn't change. God has this language, this symbolic language that we talk about. And then we'll just touch on Revelation on Thursday. And then on Friday, we'll start going through the timelines and how God does time. And then Saturday, I'm going to talk about the tabernacle. And then on Sunday, we'll get into the beasts and God's eventual triumph in the end of the world.
Wow.
Hallelujah.
Come. Okay, I don't have a clock up here, so I don't know what time it is.
11:23.
11:23. Okay, did good. Only took about an hour. I actually did this to a Bible study class just as a try run before I came here. It took me 2.5 to 3 hours to get through this presentation because they kept stopping me and we kept going down rabbi trails. I call them rabbi trails and rabbi tails. All right, we've got about half an hour before lunch. Has anybody got any questions?